They never talked about it. That's what Ralph Smith remembers about growing up in Bethesda in the 1930s. It wasn't until he was a teenager that he began to hear whispers. His father had been a suspect in the car barn murders, one of our region's most famous murder mysteries.
My dad was home asleep, and they came and rousted him out of bed. He said at that time he was a suspect. They wanted to know where his uncle was, and he said, well, he's at work.
Ralph's father worked at the Capitol Transit car barn and its ticket station on Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase, along with his uncle, Emery Smith, the station's night watchman. But on a cold January night in 1935, police say there was a robbery. More than $1,200, $20,000 in today's money, stolen. The clerk murdered inside a locked office, with no sign of Emery.
They found him the next day in Rock Creek Park.
Ralph Smith says his father was quickly cleared of his uncle's murder. He says his dad and his three uncles continue to work for the trolley company.
They always thought it was an inside job.
But as time passed, the Smith family assumed police had given up on finding the killer, until they saw our I-Team story showing how Montgomery County Detective Brian Stafford is still working on what is now his oldest cold case.
I think they're all solvable.
At the time, Detective Stafford told us they had lost contact with the Smith family, and he wasn't sure if anyone was still alive.
I called Dad and I said, "Did you know they have a whole case on Uncle Emery?" And he goes, "Well, they have very little." And I said, "No, they don't have very little. They have very lot."
Karen Smith said they had no idea the police file contained bullet fragments, original notebooks, hand-drawn maps, and 81-year-old evidence photos.
In 1935, it's not like everybody just walked around with a 35mm digital camera and photographed everything. That was a big deal, to photograph the desk and all of the evidence and the shoe prints. And they didn't know what we know now. And to collect all of that and take meticulous notes, they did a really good job.
And she should know. Karen is a retired homicide investigator who now runs her own forensic evidence consulting firm in Florida. She's worked on more than 500 murder cases herself and says to find evidence this old is extremely rare.
It tells me they've taken extraordinarily good care of that case file. I'm very grateful for my family, for my dad especially. So I want to thank you to them for that.
Ralph has now moved to Florida to be closer to Karen. At 81 years old, he is the last of his generation who remembers what it was like after the murders.
These cases probably never, ever going to really be solved.
I like to be more of an optimist.
Karen says the fact her family is still searching for answers shows how cold cases can haunt families for generations.
To have some kind of catharsis, even though there'd never be any justice, it would still be an answer.
She says she continues to hold out hope their murder can be solved. In Gainesville, Florida, Tisha Thompson, News 4 I-Team.
It says 1934, so they've been married about a year, and they're